Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to stay up to date with all things Clown Decade, do subscribe to the channel, and of course, become a member if you so wish. And you're getting the special weekend video today because there's been a request for a video that I think's relatively important to go through. And that is that effectively, given at the time of the last election, I was opposed to 0 seats and thought, oh, vote some of the based ones in, like, say, Robert Jenrick, like, say, Suella Braverman, definitely Liz Truss. As far as I'm concerned, she's still one of the trustworthy ones. Well, it turns out that we are going to go through a timeline that shows, actually, 0 seats was the way forward. I am having to officially apologise to the people I was making fun of for 0 seats, because as it turns out, it probably was actually a good idea, despite the fact that, obviously, Reform were nowhere near ready for a government, which they probably weren't going to win anyway. We all knew Labour were in, and we all knew Labour were going to be a disaster, but we need normies to figure that out, and normies are figuring that out pretty hard. So, largely, hindsight 2020, yeah, 0 seats was right. So, why is that? Well, I've already done a video on Zia Yusuf calling out the supposedly based members of the cabinet, obviously Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick being two of them, for lying about their hands being tied and not being able to use parliamentary privilege because of the Official Secrets Act. It's total nonsense, but on top of all that, we have a High Court judgment that I am going to quickly go to a paragraph of that was published on the 23rd of the 11th, 2023. That is 23rd of November. Now, just to get the timeline absolutely right, this is after Suella Braverman had already left the Home Office. She got sacked from the Home Office, but it was while Robert Jenrick was still a minister, immigration minister of all things, and he would obviously be privy to information on a major immigration case such as this. So in paragraph 16, after explaining how the superinjunction will work to obviously cover up the Afghan data leak and the fact that 24,000 of them, along with their families, are going to be planned to be brought over to the British Isles without the consent or knowledge of the British people, he says this: I should explain that the injunction did not constrain what could be said in Parliament. Under Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, no such constraint would be constitutional or lawful. I varied the injunction to make this point clear for the avoidance of doubt. See paragraph 15 of my order of 13 October 2023. Nevertheless, MPs and peers cannot ask questions about something they do not know about, and the parliamentary authorities may regard the existence of an injunction as relevant to their decisions about what can and cannot be raised. So again, Robert Jenrick was still immigration minister at this point. I highly doubt he will have not been advised about this particular judgment. I highly doubt he would not have had access to it either, and quite clearly there, black and white, plain as day, you cannot use parliamentary privilege as an excuse not to talk about this. So, effectively, he has been caught with his hand in the till. And Suella Braverman, being obviously a barrister, should also know about the details of parliamentary privilege too, and yet she still lied about it too. As far as I'm concerned, both these people are the worst type of Tory, where they will try and pretend they're on your side and then at the end of the day still act like weasels to get out of excusing their protection of the party that has betrayed you. Speaking of which, we're going to go into another judgment right now. So this other judgment was dated 15th of the 7th, 2025, or literally released 4 days ago, by Mr. Justice Chamberlain, who has been presiding over this entire case since the beginning, in a case of the Ministry of Defence versus a whole bunch of media outlets. Obviously all about the superinjunction, and the reason I want to go through this particular judgment is because there is a very, very succinct timeline of this entire ordeal, and I want to make it very clear, along with this timeline, bringing a timeline in of my own to show you what ministers were doing around the time of different judgments being made and things like that. So we'll get into it. So after going through some details about the justification and workings of the superinjunction, we get into the timeline. So the dataset at issue in these proceedings contains details of those who had applied under the Afghan Relocation Assistance Programme, or the ARAP, and the ex gratia predecessor of the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, or the ACRS, for relocation to the UK on the ground that they are at risk from the Taliban as a result of their work with or for the UK prior to the Taliban coup in 2021. It was released in error in early 2022, and in August 2023 it became known to the MOD that parts of the dataset had been published on a Facebook page, and shortly after this the MOD applied for an injunction. Right. So as you can see, to help you visualise, I am making a timeline of everything we are going to be finding out about. So far, it's early 2022, MOD leaked Afghan data, and then 18 months later, in August 2023, the MOD actually find out about the leak and so apply for the injunction. Already there's questions within the MOD of how do things like this happen, but given what happened at Bryce Norton, it sounds like the MOD need a complete redesign, or as some people would say, reform. Although the MOD did not originally apply for one, the judge to whom the application was first made, Robin Knowles J, decided on 1st September 2023 to grant a superinjunction, that is to say an injunction which prohibited disclosure of the existence of the order as well as the underlying information. Robin Knowles J's reasons for granting that form of relief were set out in a written ruling handed down in private on the 2nd of September 2023. His ruling is also being published today. So we can add this to the timeline as well. And as you can see, pretty much everything that's happening from August to September here will have Suella Braverman as the Home Secretary, and of course Robert Jenrick as the Immigration Secretary, and Rishi Sunak is obviously Prime Minister for this whole period. When it comes to the Defence Minister, it's Ben Wallace, but he's wet anyway, so who cares about him? And eventually Grant Shapps actually takes over. Grant Shapps actually took over in August of 2023, so he will have been in place when the superinjunction was brought about and personally signed off on it. Suella Braverman will have known this, Robert Jenrick will have known this, they both admit that they're new to this, along with the plan to bring over 24,000 Afghans, who they know weren't vetted properly, who they know some of them were actually rejected by the Home Office, but obviously because of a bit of blackmail, this is why the superinjunction was brought in, they had to bring them all over. That's effectively what happened. Anyway, I'm not going through the original judgment by Robin Knowles, it's not particularly interesting for this video, but the link's in the description. So neither the hearing before Robin Knowles J, nor any of the subsequent hearings, has taken place in public. At some of the hearings, representatives of the media who have been notified of the injunction have been present. The number of these representatives has gradually increased. The media organisations now involved are the entities which own the news agents, a podcast, The Independent, Times, Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, Financial Times and the Press Association. This was another thing. The press knew about this for ages and were obviously, basically right from the beginning, were aware of this, and obviously because of the gagging order couldn't say anything. And I don't throw any blame to them because there is a way around this, you anonymously pass this on to an American media corporation, they publish it because the superinjunction only works within Britain. But ultimately you also have the threat of, if you let this out, people will die hanging over your head, and largely the media kind of work as a cartel in that way, for reasons that I think are perfectly understandable. But quite clearly from this, the media wanted to talk about this for 2 years and couldn't, because as Jacob Rees-Mogg goes through on the Daily T, basically everyone was panicking in government, and they covered it all up. So the superinjunction was continued by me after hearings on 13th of October 2023, 31st October and 1st November 2023, 1st and 18th of December 2023, 22nd of January 2024, 1st, 2nd of February 2024. I gave judgments explaining my reasons on 23 November 2023, judgment number 1. That's the one where he made very clear that actually parliamentary privilege was not being blocked by the superinjunction, and 15th February 2024. I'm not going to add all of them on the timeline. Anyway, I have added to the timeline that Suella was sacked on the 13th of November 2023, and then on 23rd, that is when we got the parliamentary privilege allowed judgment. This, by the way, does not exonerate Suella. As I mentioned before, she is a barrister and should know about parliamentary privilege and its absolute nature. We're just putting the facts down here, people. Anyway, as the judgment continues, Mr. Justice Chamberlain notes here that the grant of a superinjunction in the circumstances of this case gave rise to a serious free speech concern. The information to which it related was highly relevant to a series of policy decisions being taken by the government about how to safeguard those whose safety had been jeopardised by the release of the dataset. The grant of the superinjunction had the effect of completely shutting down the ordinary mechanisms of accountability which operate in a democracy. This led to what I described as a scrutiny vacuum, and that's definitely happened, because we saw it with Labour, by the way, as well. There's a lot of Tories saying, why aren't Labour getting anything? And it's because everyone already hates Labour. But they also signed off to extend this injunction, by the way, as we'll get into. And they did that so they could sign off £7 billion to effectively get the rest of the people that invitations have already been sent out to by the Tories to get them over here. And obviously you don't really want that while you're trying to say, we'll keep the economy under control, look at this 22 billion black hole that wasn't even fully the Tories' fault anyway. And one of my main things of all this is that basically, half the cabinet will have been keeping this secret from you. Again, this whole video is leading up to, well, did Rishi Sunak call the election early because of this? Because, well, we're going to keep going through the timeline. I decided on the 23rd November that the superinjunction should be continued based on the MOD's assessment that there was a real risk that the Taliban do not already know about the compromise of the dataset. They almost definitely did. Disclosure of the fact that the dataset would cause them to take steps which led to them obtaining it. They already had it. And in that case, many thousands whose details were included in the dataset could be killed or injured, and the UK government would have no realistic way of safeguarding them. Again, I think it was said elsewhere, but they will have already had US data on these same people as well, given that absolutely atrocious exfiltration of the country by the Americans. And so he extended it so that there was a safeguarding plan that they could extend, and that was the 24,000 being brought over without us knowing about it. So this might not be adding a date to the timeline, however it definitely does add some context, as the injunction was going on for about 4 months and they still had no plan, and so obviously they extended it on the 24th of November. 23rd of November, sorry. And then it came to February 2025. This is obviously after Robert Jenrick had left, resigning over what he said was disappointment with the Rwanda scheme. James Cleverly was in as the Home Secretary, and Tom Pursglove, the Immigration Minister, so they will have both known this part. So on the 15th of February, a plan had been formulated for the safeguarding of the Afghans, though some of the details were still under discussion, so I decided that the injunction should be continued again. The central basis for that discussion can be seen from 31A and B of my judgment. Long story short there, the reason for the extension of the injunction was to save approximately 13,000 lives from Afghanistan. I'm sorry, that's underestimating it. It's closer to 15,500, if these numbers are to be believed, so they extended the super injunction to try and save these lives. Again, you're not allowed to know about any of this. There is a scrutiny vacuum that Mr. Justice Chamberlain has acknowledged, but at the same time, the lives of Afghanistanis matter more than, well, the will of the British people and the scrutiny of Parliament, quite clearly. Lives that, once again, we are not even fully sure are at risk. That's been made quite clear from an awful lot of this reporting. Anyway, naturally, this is going on the timeline yet again. 15th of February, injunction extended to save Afghans. Though, just as a bit of an aside for the timeline for now, I found this paragraph quite interesting. So there was real uncertainty about the effect of the super injunction on a much larger group affected by the disclosure of the dataset, whom the government had decided would not be relocated or otherwise assisted. It was very likely that the existence of the dataset would come to the Taliban's attention in a matter of months. I'm not being funny, but we are over a year and a half from when it was initially leaked. They've obviously got it. And continuation of the super injunction would mean that they could not be forewarned of the danger to them, or give compensation which would enable them to take action to avoid danger. The possibility that the continuation of the super injunction was having an adverse effect on this cohort, and the adverse effect on the public and parliamentary scrutiny, made it important to obtain a clearer evidential picture. So while continuing the super injunction, I directed an evidential hearing at which a representative of the MOD would give oral evidence and face questioning by counsel for the media representatives in open but in private, and by the special advocates in closed. In other words, give the media an update on what's going on with the injunction and basically let them know that there's people over there that are probably going to be left to die. So I suppose the amount of Afghans we can save does actually have a limit. But anyway, the evidential hearing took place on 30th of April and 1st of May 2024, and by that time there had been further policy discussions about the response to the disclosure of the dataset. It had been decided to offer access to relocation to a further cohort of 2,300 individuals. So we're now at about 17,000, something like that, 16,500. When immediate family members were inclined, this amounted to 11,500 people. Oh my goodness, that's 23,500 pretty much. So it gets extended and extended and extended. The costs of relocating this number of people and of housing them in the UK would be spread over years and could be assumed to run into several billion pounds, the sort of money which makes a material difference to government spending plans and is normally the stuff of political debate. Very true. Of my judgment handed down on the 21st of May 2024, this meant that the cohort who had been offered relocation to the UK could amount to 20,000 people. Well, it's over that, and we know it's over that. Anyway, so at this point I think we need to get back to the timeline. Oh, and look at that, 21st of May, a judgment handed down confirming that we're getting 20,000 Afghans, and not only that, but it concluded that the injunction should end in 21 days, pending appeal, of course. However, with the judgment already saying, well, there's probably basically no point anymore, are you really going to risk the injunction? So, well, what was the idea here? Well, the injunction ends in 21 days. That's 3 weeks away. That then means that this all becomes public on the 11th of July 2024. What happened the day after? Rishi Sunak called the election on the 22nd of May, as you can see on my timeline, for the date of the election to be the 4th of July 2024, before the injunction is to come out. And one thing that was on everyone's mind at the time is, why the hell, when they are doing so badly in the polls, and when they are promising that the Rwanda plan is definitely going to work, and that planes are going to be lifted off in the next few weeks, is he calling it now? Originally people thought it's to catch people out by surprise, it's to catch Labour when they're not quite ready, especially Reform as well, because they're very amateur. Is it because he doesn't think that the planes are going to take off? Well, it turns out that they're actually one of the larger parts of it is that while they're trying to get these planes taking off, there's going to be an absolutely huge news story that's going to be in everyone's mind for years, saying that while they're letting all these planes take off to take people back to Rwanda, they're letting a hell of a load of Afghanistanis come over with minimal vetting. Because realistically, how are you vetting these people if the Taliban are in charge and are not communicating with you to help you vet these people? Let's be real. So I'm not saying this is the only reason of why the election was called. I can't even confirm if it was a reason at all. However, looking at those dates, there's pretty much only one conclusion I can come to, and that's that this court ruling that the Cabinet will have been made aware of on the 21st, possibly the 22nd, depending when it was published, would lead to one of the most embarrassing announcements for an election ever. Out in the rain, no umbrella whatsoever, it's clear that they were not prepared for it. This is a good conclusion to come to from that event. So, forget about Jenrick and Braverman for a second, because those two were the people we thought were based within the Tory party. The Tory party in general is just there to protect itself, and here it was literally doing this to avoid 0 seats. And as I said at the beginning, if I knew about this, if I knew about these Afghans coming over at the behest of the Tory party and they tried to hide it from us, I would have been firmly on the side of 0 seats. And pretty much since I've actually found out about all this, I am firmly on the side of 0 seats, so we know that that is very true. It looks exactly like the government was trying to cover this up and then decided to throw out an election to, I don't know, throw a Hail Mary and say, okay, we'll try and win the most seats we can here because it's probably the most we are actually going to win, and that was probably true, and over the next 5 years we'll try and recover and recuperate. But they keep messing up. They mess up all the time. Who's Kemi Badenoch? Who knows? People say they like her, but she's clearly not a good leader. That seems to be what comes down to it. And now who's replacing her? If it's Jenrick, he's screwed, because he is absolutely easy meat for the Reform side of politics in the United Kingdom. But anyway, we're moving on to political commentary in the Monday. Now we've got a timeline to finish off. So it turns out the snap election wasn't necessary anyway, because as the judgment goes on, the Court of Appeal actually extended the superinjunction because they found that the judgment from Mr. Justice Chamberlain was not very good, people's lives would be in danger, and there was reason for, I don't really want to say public safety, for Afghanistani safety, the superinjunction should continue, and no parliamentary scrutiny on this should be allowed. And it's actually in this paragraph at the end where you can see Mr. Justice Chamberlain saying, I ordered the injunction be discharged with effect from 21 days after the handing down of my judgment. And obviously after, that's where the Court of Appeal decided actually it should be extended. And it doesn't have a date there, but that was actually the 26th of July. Anyway, when it came to the extension of this superinjunction, it was basically extended until, well, it basically got reviewed every 3 months, and it was only until Mr. Justice Chamberlain decided it needed to be discharged, that's when it would happen. And so he did a review in November 2024 and February 2025, but the evidential developments which were germane to the assessment in various ways, and there was nothing to indicate a sufficiency material change in the evidential position before the Court of Appeal to justify the discharging of the injunction. So basically there's nothing to really add on the timeline from July 2024 until at least February 2025. That is until you get to May 2025. In part to deal with an application to vary and clarify the injunction by a firm of solicitors, Bearing's law representing more than 600 claimants who were aware that they had been some kind of data breach and were considering bringing a data protection claim. In parallel, I gave further the direction determining which of the material before the court could be published in the event that the injunction were discharged. A further closed hearing on the issue was listed for 26th of June 2025. So while this is going on, Afghanistanis that we've brought over and we are basically paying to be retired for the rest of their lives are now trying to go further and trying to claim that, well, there was a data breach, therefore we can claim against the MOD. This, in my opinion, is not the behaviour of people whose lives you have just saved. You think they'd be a bit more grateful than that. But alas, that is the way of the world for some people. Anyway, this is all on the timeline. On the day before the hearing, 25 June 2025, I received a copy of the review report prepared under the supervision of a retired civil servant, Paul Rimmer. An open version of this report is annexed to this judgment. I do not therefore need to summarise it. It is sufficient to say that it includes the conclusion, with respect to individuals whose data is included in the dataset, that acquisition of the dataset by the Taliban is unlikely to substantially change any individual's existing exposure, given the volume of data already available. It also includes the conclusions that it appears unlikely that merely being on the dataset will be grounds of targeting, and it is therefore also unlikely the family members immediately or more distant will be targeted simply because the principal appears in the dataset. If that's the case, why are they still here? The whole point of refugee status is that you only stay here until it is safe to go back. Quite clearly, there is no risk to them, so they can go back. Is that going to happen? No, you're going to have to pay for them to stay here. These conclusions fundamentally undermine the evidence basis on which I, in Judgments 1 and 2 in the Court of Appeal, relied in deciding the superinjunction should be continued. I made clear that this was my provisional view at a closed hearing on 1st July 2025, at which the Special Advocate submitted that the superinjunction should be discharged. On 4 July 2025, the Government Legal Department confirmed that the Secretary of State had decided to discontinue the relocation programme and to apply to discharge the injunction. Which is the funny thing about it, because now that I think about it, people were trying to blame Labour for extending this programme. Turns out they weren't. The MOD, under the Tories by the way, under Grant Shapps, appealed to extend this, and it was basically indefinitely appealed, subject to review every 3 months. It was them that extended it, and it was only through the courts and a senior civil servant that evidence changed and they could actually get rid of it. It was really nothing to do with Labour. I said it in a previous video. Labour haven't done an awful lot wrong here, they just signed off on what the Tories had already planned. How much can you blame them for that, given that the invitations were already out? Not a lot, really. So Labour certainly do have questions to answer on why they didn't try and find evidence to counteract this earlier, but realistically, if it's in the hands of the courts anyway, why would they bother? And anyway, when it comes to 4th of July, which is when, obviously, the story broke, I've covered pretty much everything from here anyway on my own channel. And so I think with that we will have a quick review of the timeline. So this all starts in early 2022 where the MOD leaked the Afghan data, and then obviously the rest of the department actually only found out a year and a half later in August 2023. In September they decided to panic and get a superinjunction, and obviously not too long after that Suella was sacked. I say not too long, it was about a month after, but still. Suella being sacked means that she was aware of the superinjunction because it was a Home Office issue as well as a Defence Secretary issue, so she did know about it, and she admits she knew about it. In November of 2023, parliamentary privilege was allowed and the injunction was indeed extended. I've realised I've not put it on the timeline here, but Robert Jenrick was then, well, he wasn't then sacked, he left, he resigned from the Cabinet as Immigration Minister on the 13th of December, and so he knew about this injunction. And if he was advised that parliamentary privilege was not covered, that's completely wrong, because obviously that appears in the actual judgment itself. On the 15th of February, the injunction was extended. The excuse was to save more Afghanistanis who were being brought over, and of course this was all signed off on a plan from the Tories. We then go to the 21st of May, where a judgment was handed down, and it is confirmed that we will be getting at least 20,000 Afghanistanis. This, from a lot of people's estimates, is a vast underestimation, but whatever, it's not for this video. And in 21st of May, the judgment also concluded that the injunction should end. The very day after, Rishi Sunak called the general election. The timing could not be more coincidental, if you ask me. It's pretty conclusive that the Tories, throughout this entire ordeal, just kept panicking, and now that the cat is out of the bag and they can't do anything about it, effectively the people involved are pretty much in hiding, but especially Suella and Jenrick, because obviously their whole image is I am anti-immigration and very much pro if we have refugees, we vet them pretty well. And they were directly involved in a case that brought them all over. Okay, they claim to have been fighting against this, but then did absolutely nothing to actually whistleblow this betrayal. So, as far as I'm concerned, they're as bad as the rest of them. Anyway, then luckily after the election finished, it turned out the injunction was extended indefinitely, obviously going through 3 monthly reviews. And then obviously some Afghans decided to raise a data breach case, which obviously the injunction was blocking evidence for. You then get to 25 of June 2025, and a senior civil servant gives evidence that the injunction should end, and then on the 4th of July, they decided that on the 15th of July is when the superinjunction should decay. And then we've had this complete mess since, and, well, you've ended up with an awful lot of people who are never going to trust the Tories again, and for some reason an awful lot of people thinking that the behaviour from the Tories here is somewhat acceptable. It's all very strange. People have got very strange battle lines. But hey, you know where I stand on all this, and you know where I would advocate you stand on all of this, which is Tories de lend arrest. They have very much proven to us that all that matters to them is keeping the party going, and that means betraying you and then hiding the fact that they betrayed you. We have pretty good evidence that this is exactly what this whole Afghan scheme was about. Anyway, I think I've covered everything I want to cover today, and that is the Tories betray you, they will betray you in the future, and I don't know why any of you would trust them again. And I think anyone that is trusting them again is either an enemy or much more likely just completely stupid. But there we go. Right, with that, I'll wrap up. So if you enjoyed this video, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member or leave a super chat or super thanks for all the great work that I do. If you're interested in the streams that I do, on Tuesday we have Tosh News next week. We'll be going through, obviously, news stories of the week, and that will include this. On Thursday, I do gaming streams, so we're continuing with Hollow Knight, so do come along to that. And then it's Laughing at the Guardian with some whamming next Saturday. Right, videos out as and when I can make them. Once again, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.